By the time the plane lifted off from Logan International and Boston shrank into a circuit board of lights below me, I had become a stranger to the woman who had sat through 28 Thanksgivings at my mother's table. I had a window seat. I had a one-way ticket. I had, folded into the front pocket of my carry-on, a California apartment lease, and the confidential transfer paperwork my firm's HR department had processed under a non-disclosure agreement. But to understand why a 28-year-old biomedical engineer was standing on the precipice of a total getaway, why I had sold my car to a stranger, packed my entire life into 3 suitcases, and let 19 missed calls stack up on a phone I was about to render unreachable, I had to take you back to a Monday morning in November. I had to take you to the coffee machine. The office kitchen smelled, as it always did at 9:47 a.m., of burnt Colombian roast and the faint chemical tang of whatever they used to scrub the microwave. I was watching the machine push out a thin brown ribbon into my mug and thinking about nothing. Or rather, I was thinking about the cytotoxicity assay I needed to run by 11, which was the same thing as nothing, because when you were a biomedical engineer, your brain in idle mode was just quieter engineering. Teagan, hey. Selena, new hire, 3 weeks in, the kind of person who still wore her badge lanyard where everyone could see it. I turned and gave her the smile I kept in a drawer for professional use. Hey, how's the onboarding going? Oh my God, endless, she laughed, and then her face did something strange. It brightened in a way that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with some private delight she was about to unwrap. Hey, random question. Is your mom in the Ivy and Iron Society? The coffee machine hissed. Something small and cold slid down the inside of my ribs. She is, I said. I kept my voice level. You could train yourself to do that. You could train yourself to sound like a person who was not recalculating every possible trajectory in her head at the same time. I knew it. Oh, this is so funny. My mom, Mrs. Rivera, she's the VP this year. I dropped by her place yesterday to pick up some stuff for my new apartment, and they had the afternoon tea, and I literally walked right into your mother. I mean, I looked at her and I was like, that's Teagan's mom. You guys have the exact same eyes. I inherited my mother's facial structure. This was a biological fact I had never been able to negotiate. Sometimes I caught myself in an elevator mirror and had to do a small internal correction. No, it's you. It's only you before I could look away. That's wild, I said. So I totally fangirled. I told her about your project, and how you won the Innovation Award last cycle, and how honestly, Teagan, you're kind of the reason I'm not drowning here. I told her you're my role model on the floor. She said all of it with shining eyes. There was no malice in her, not a particle. She was the sweetest possible delivery system for a bomb. I held my coffee cup with both hands so she wouldn't see my fingers. That's so kind of you to say. Thank you, really. She seemed so proud. I'm sure she did. We should grab lunch this week. Absolutely. Send me a Slack. I walked back to my desk along the long hallway of glass-walled conference rooms, a hollow, leaden weight anchoring my chest. Selena was new, a clean slate who knew nothing of the jagged reality of my life or the secrets I guarded so closely. You could not ask someone to keep a secret you had not told them existed. My mother had been sitting in Mrs. Rivera's sunroom yesterday afternoon, probably holding a bone china cup, and a 23-year-old had handed her a weapon wrapped in a compliment. At my desk, I stared at the assay protocol on my second monitor and read the same line 4 times. Incubate at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for no less than. Incubate at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for no less than. What's meant to come will come, especially when someone else feels entitled to a piece of it. The clock on my taskbar clicked over to 10 a.m. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the mahogany surface of my desk. The caller ID didn't say Mom. It felt more like a subpoena. I let it vibrate 3 times, a small, pathetic act of rebellion before I picked it up. Hi, Mom. Sweetheart. Her voice was a pour of warm honey, and I understood immediately that I was in trouble. My mother's voice only went to that register when she wanted something, and it had been weeks since she'd wanted something small. We haven't had the whole family together in so long. Why don't you come by tonight for dinner? Just an easy one. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. In my mother's vocabulary, nothing fancy was a phrase that appeared exclusively in the sentences just before something fancy. It was the linen napkin laid on top of the trap. "Tonight's kind of tight, Mom. I've got Troy's coming. Your father's already started the roast." The roast, on a Monday, in November. "Okay," I said. "What time?" 7. "Don't work too late, honey. You work so hard." She hung up before I could answer, which was also how I knew my mother did not hang up first. My mother stayed on the line until you were the one who left, so she could tell the next person how you were too busy for her. I set the phone down very carefully on the desk, the way you set down a vial of something that might have been a pathogen and might have been nothing. My reflection looked up at me from the dark screen, my mother's eyes. Unfortunately, in my own face, I had not been invited to dinner. I had been summoned to an operating table, and somewhere in the kitchen of my childhood home, my mother was already sharpening her knives and calling it love. Have you ever felt it too, how the things branded as love within a family can take on the shape of such a razor-sharp wound? The first thing I saw when I opened the front door was the flowers. My mother had arranged a wide, low bowl of white carnations at the center of the dining table, an architectural thing, too formal for a Monday, blooms packed so tight they looked upholstered. White carnations were what my mother brought out when she wanted the house to smell like a recital. They had a clean, faintly peppery scent that masked the fact that no one in the room was telling the truth. "There she is," my father said, rising from his armchair with the kind of enthusiasm he reserved for televised touchdowns. "The Innovation Award herself." He said it like he had always known. He said it like it had always been his to be proud of. "Hi, Dad. Come here, kiddo." He gave me a one-armed hug that smelled of Old Spice and the red wine he'd already started on. Over his shoulder I clocked the table. 4 place settings, not 6. No high chairs. No juice cups. Troy's wife and the boys were nowhere. My mother had cleared the field of witnesses of anyone who might have slowed the surgery down with small talk about soccer practice or a scraped knee. Troy was on the couch with his phone angled against his thigh, scrolling. He looked up with the warmed-over smile of a man who had been briefed. "Hey, sis." "Hey. Heard about the promo. Big deal." "It's not a promotion, Troy. It's just the Innovation Award, a one-time bonus for the Q3 project." "Same difference." It was not the same difference. Nothing in our family was ever the same difference. But I put my bag down on the bench in the hallway, and I walked into the dining room, and I let my mother kiss the air beside my cheek. Sit," she said, "before it gets cold." For the first 15 minutes it was almost unbearable how cheerful they were. My father carved the roast with the ceremony of a man knighting something. My mother circulated the green beans twice. Troy, who under normal circumstances treated my existence as ambient noise, asked me 2 consecutive questions about my work, nodding along with a furrowed, performative concentration, as if my explanation of flow cytometry were the most fascinating thing he had encountered all quarter. "We are so proud of you, Teagan," my father said, lifting his glass. "Truly. You're such a capable daughter. Your mother heard the whole story back at Mrs. Rivera's. You've made us proud. But I'm a little hurt. Really, why wasn't it you who shared this with us yourself?" He looked at me, a flicker of reproach in his eyes that softened instantly, as if he were merely performing the act of being slighted. In his world, after all, no grievance could ever compete with the sheer, shimmering fact of my utility. My mother's eyes glittered above the carnations. "Thank you," I said. Then my father's face did the thing. The small collapse. The shoulders settling half an inch. The long, put-upon sigh, aimed sideways at my brother like a sympathy flare. "Troy, though," he said. "Troy's been burning the candle at both ends." "Dad," Troy began, in a tone calibrated to sound like reluctant humility. He's just exhausted, burnt out, really." I had not yet taken a bite. I was watching my mother's serving hand, because I knew what was coming before she did it, the way you knew the last note of a song you grew up with. She reached over with the fork and the long knife, and she lifted the prime cut off the platter, the medium-rare centerpiece, dark-crusted, blood pink in the middle, the piece that had since I was 7 years old, landed automatically on my brother's plate, as natural and unthinking as the daily act of drinking water. She set it on mine. "There, sweetheart," she said. "You deserve it." The gesture was so nakedly engineered I almost laughed. I looked down at the steak. It looked back up at me, glistening, a prop in a play I had not agreed to be in. "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to." She pressed her palm briefly to the back of my hand. Her rings were cold. "We don't tell you enough." Across the table, Troy cleared his throat. It was the cue. It had to be. "So, listen," he said. "I wanted to talk to you guys about Frederick. The kid got into a great program. I mean, great school. We're looking at the tuition situation and, he did a small helpless laugh. Clients aren't as generous as they used to be. You know how it is out there." I did not know how it was out there. Troy had not had real clients in 2 years. His LinkedIn was a cenotaph of inspirational reposts about leadership mindset and black and white photographs of mountains. He had been blacklisted at every firm in the city that mattered, and we all knew it, and none of us were allowed to say it. My father laid his fork down with the soft click of a gavel. "Teagan is going to help Troy pay for Frederick's tuition." It was phrased as an announcement, as if the discussion had already happened, in some other room, and I had simply missed it. My mother's voice slid in on top of his, already sweet, already planning. "You were named the Innovation Award after all. There's always a bonus for those, isn't there? And you've always been so good about sharing your bonuses with the family. This is just the same, honey, just like before." Just like before. For a second the dining room went thin, and I was 23 again, signing the dealership paperwork for Troy's BMW because, as my mother had explained, a man in his position couldn't pull up to meetings in a Corolla, frozen pure gray metallic. $840 a month, routed from my first team bonus, because it's temporary, sweetheart, just until he's drawing the kind of compensation he deserves. I was 25, Venmoing my mother the monthly $500 for raising me, a debt with no principal and no payoff date. I was 26, 27, every windfall dismantled before it had cooled. I had paid off $60,000 of my own student loans the month before, alone. No one had helped, and no one celebrated. To them, my hard-won financial independence was simply a new goldmine to be tapped for Troy's benefit. "Mom." I set my fork down, carefully. I made sure my voice was low and steady, the voice I used in meetings when a senior engineer was wrong about something and I was about to say so. "The bonus is mine. I already had plans for it." The table went still. My father opened his mouth. My mother got there first. "Teagan, it's not as if you're in any rush to use that money anyway, so what's the point of letting it sit in the bank when your brother can't afford your nephew's tuition? Just use it as a down payment and co-sign the student loan. It's only $40,000, honey." "Only." Troy leaned forward, and the arrogance he usually wore like cologne peeled away into a rehearsed softness. "Sis, please, for the family, for Frederick." I looked at my mother. I looked her directly in the eye across the white carnations, across the steak she had laid on my plate like a bribe, across 28 years. My answer is no. My mother's face did not change for a full 3 seconds. And then it broke open into a high, keening wail, her hand flying to her chest, and she was crying before her shoulders had even begun to shake. "If you have it, you have to share," she sobbed. "Your brother is suffering." I felt a wave of something rise in my throat that I had no name for yet. Disgust, maybe, or grief, or the cold, clarifying flood of a woman finally seeing the room she had been standing in her whole life. I left the house that night without taking a single bite. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I kissed my father on the cheek out of muscle memory and drove the 40 minutes back to my apartment with the radio off, my hands at 10 and 2, the way my driving instructor had taught me when I was 16 and paying for the lessons myself. Somewhere around the Tobin Bridge I started to laugh. Not a good laugh. The short, dry kind that came out of a person who had just understood, for the first time and all at once, that the thing she thought was a misunderstanding had been a business model. Troy, I should have said, could have had a life. He was not stupid. That was the part nobody wanted to admit, because stupidity would have been a kinder diagnosis than what he actually was. He had the looks, the schools, the Rolodex my parents had curated for him since the 8th grade. For a little while, in his late 20s, he had even had a small run of luck. 2 placements in 1 quarter, a 6-figure commission, a LinkedIn post that went semi-viral among the kind of men who use the word synergy without irony. He called himself a freelance senior executive recruiter. He bought the BMW. He started showing up to cousins' weddings with a pocket square. And then, slowly, he began to believe the part. He berated a VP candidate for being 5 minutes late to a coffee meeting. He told a hiring partner at a downtown firm that she didn't understand the caliber of talent he moved in. He posted a thread on LinkedIn about how the best leaders were the ones who made people uncomfortable, and tagged a managing director who had, the week before, quietly removed him from her vendor list. By 35, every serious firm in Boston had him on a do not engage list. He did not know this because no one ever told you that. They simply stopped returning your emails. He filled the silence with content. Monday mindset. Leaders eat last. The grind is the gift. Black and white photographs of mountains he had not climbed. A man starving to death at a buffet he could no longer see. And then his son was 17 and the bill had come due, and he had looked around the room and seen me. The morning after the dinner, I went into work 30 minutes early, closed my office door, and opened the tab I had been keeping minimized for 6 weeks. Internal Transfer Request, Pacific Northwest, California Division. I had started the paperwork in October, the day I realized my mother had been adding up my raises in her head at Christmas. I had worked with HR under a signed confidentiality agreement. My manager had written the recommendation without telling a single person on my team. My performance metrics did the rest. Approval came through by noon. With a start date 3 weeks out and a relocation stipend that would cover the flight and the first month's rent on a sunlit 1-bedroom in a city where no one in my family had ever set foot. That night, I started packing. There was not much to pack. I had been living, without quite realizing it, like a person ready to run. A rented apartment, an old couch, 3 plants I could give to my neighbor. My books fit in 2 boxes. My clothes fit in 2 suitcases. I found a private dealer for the car, a soft-spoken man in Quincy who offered me $400 under Blue Book and a same-week pickup. We agreed I would drop the keys the day before my flight. Flight booked. One way. Window seat. Every evening I came home and removed another object from the apartment. And every evening the rooms grew lighter. And every evening I slept a little deeper. As if the house itself were exhaling with me getting ready, like I was, to let go. A week into the packing, my father came to my office. He did not call ahead. He did not text. He did what men of his generation did when they wanted to remind you who you belonged to. He showed up, in a camel coat and his good shoes, and had the security desk call up to my floor. "There's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's your father." I took the elevator down with my badge clipped to my blazer and a low hum starting under my sternum. The lobby of my building was all glass and polished concrete, the kind of space that amplified voices and heel strikes and made private conversations impossible. Which, I understood as soon as I saw him standing by the reception desk with his hands clasped behind his back, was the point. "Dad." "Sweetheart." He opened his arms. I did not step into them. He adjusted, smoothly, into a pat on my shoulder. "Just wanted to see where my daughter works. Quite a building. You should have called." I was in the neighborhood. He was not in the neighborhood. My father lived 36 miles away and had not driven into the city on a weekday in a decade. I guided him toward the low leather bench by the window, away from the reception desk, though there was nowhere in that lobby that was actually away from anything. The security guard glanced up and then went back to his monitor. 2 of my coworkers walked past us with their lunch bags and gave me the small, curious smile that people gave when they saw you in a context they could not place. Before I sat down, I slid my hand into my blazer pocket and pressed the red circle on the voice memo app. I had opened it in the elevator. I had known what this was the moment the security desk said the word father. He started before I had fully settled. "There's only 2 weeks until the deadline, Teagan." "I know the deadline." 2 weeks, and if you don't sign, the spot is forfeited. Frederick loses the seat. 12 years of that boy's hard work, 12 years down the drain. "Dad." "He's a good kid. He didn't do anything to deserve this. You understand that, don't you?" He's 17. You remember what 17 felt like. I remembered what 17 felt like. At 17, I had been filling out FAFSA forms at the kitchen table alone while my mother reminded me, from the other room, to keep it down because Troy was studying for the GMAT. I remember, I said. Then how can you do this to him? How can you look that boy in the eye at Christmas? Dad, Frederick is not the one asking me to co-sign. He's the one who pays if you don't. He leaned forward. His voice had dropped into the register he used in church, grave and slightly wounded, the voice of a man performing decency for an invisible audience. Blood is thicker than water, Teagan. That's not a saying, that's a fact. When your brother is drowning, you don't stand on the dock and explain to him about plans. My phone sat in my pocket, recording every syllable. I let him keep going. I let him talk about sacrifice, and about how my mother hadn't slept, and about how he had raised me to be better than this. I watched a woman in the lobby cafe stir her coffee and glance over at us twice. I watched my father's mouth shape the words selfish and understood, with a calm that surprised me, that $40,000 was only the first tuition bill. There were 3 more years after that. Books. Housing. The inevitable emergency. I did the math while he spoke. $160,000, minimum, chained to a man who could not keep a client and a nephew I would be taught to resent. I'll think about it, Dad. It was the first lie I had ever told him on purpose. He softened instantly, because he had come for a yes, and was willing to accept a maybe. That's all I'm asking, sweetheart, that's all. I watched my father depart, a final goodbye lingering in the air, then rode the elevator back up to my floor. I knew that if I hadn't chosen to lie, he would never have vacated the building without orchestrating a scene in the lobby that would have been impossible to ignore. My mother began texting me bank reminders as if the signature were already on the paper. 10 a.m. Tuesday, honey. We have an appointment with the loan officer at Citizens on Boylston. Wear something nice, first impressions matter. Don't forget your ID, your SSN card, and those 2 most recent pay stubs. I've already scheduled the slot. Your father will be out front to pick you up at 9:15. Be ready, Teagan. Frederick is counting on you. There was no question mark in any of them. There never had been. My mother did not ask, she scheduled, and the people around her arrived. I read each one, and put the phone face down. I did not reply. I did not block her either, because blocking her would have been a message, and a message would have given her something to work with. Silence, I had learned at the lobby bench with my father, was the only language my family could not translate. They could weaponize a yes, they could weaponize a no, they could not do anything with nothing, so I gave them nothing. I kept hoping, in the way that embarrassing, hopeful part of me kept hoping about my family no matter how many times it had been wrong, that one of them would pause, set down the phone, look at the empty thread on their end and think, oh, she's serious. Realize that if they wanted Frederick at that school badly enough, they had the options any other family would have: the state university, the community college transfer, a gap year, a job, a conversation. Realize that a grown man could pay for his own son, but the texts kept coming, and with them a kind of clinical confirmation. My mother still believed, my father still believed. Troy, somewhere behind them, still believed. They were sitting inside the story they had written about me, the giver, the soft one, the daughter who could be pressed until she released and no amount of silence on my end was going to crack it. They were going to walk into that bank on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock and sit in the waiting area with their IDs in their laps, looking toward the door. It was the cleanest thing they had ever done for me. They had built the exact stage I needed them to stand on. On Monday night, I slept 4 hours and woke up before my alarm. The apartment was empty in a way it had never been empty before. I had given the couch to my neighbor on Sunday. The last of the kitchen things had gone into a donation bin behind the Star Market. 3 suitcases stood by the door in a neat row, zipped, tagged, weighed. The framed diploma was at the bottom of the biggest one, wrapped in a sweater, the way my mother used to wrap Christmas ornaments when we were small, and she still treated certain things as if they mattered. I dropped the keys to the car in Quincy at 7:30. The dealer counted out the paperwork on the hood. The transfer pinged my phone before I was back on the sidewalk. I took a cab to the airport. By 9:15, the time my father's Audi would have been pulling into the visitor's spot outside my building, I was already through security at Logan. Sitting at gate B22 with a black coffee I had no intention of finishing and a boarding pass folded in half inside my passport. By 9:20, his first missed call lit up my screen, a silent, futile signal from a man who didn't yet realize he was standing in an empty lobby. At 9:22, I opened my laptop. I had written the email a week earlier and kept it as a draft, rereading it every couple of nights the way some people reread a letter from a lover. It was 3 paragraphs long. It did not contain the word love, or the word sorry, or any of the soft vocabulary I had spent 28 years using as a lubricant for their demands. It said that I was leaving. It said that I would never finance their vanity. It said that whatever version of me they had been using as collateral was no longer available, and that they should not look for me. Attached was the audio file, a recording of my father's coercion as we sat together on the lobby bench, his demands spoken with the quiet, crushing weight of a man who still believed I was his to command. I added my father, my mother, and Troy to the recipient line. I attached nothing. I explained nothing. I pressed send at 9:28. At 9:30, my phone began to ring. By the time I handed the gate agent my boarding pass, there were 19 missed calls from my father, a solid column of voicemails I would never play, and a text thread from Troy that began with the word you and descended, within 4 messages, into a register of male fury I had not known was in his vocabulary. My mother's messages came last and loudest, in the register she used only for funerals. Teagan, please, Teagan, please, Teagan, please. I took my window seat. I buckled the belt low and tight across my hips, the way the card in the seat pocket instructed. I waited until the cabin doors were armed and cross-checked, the chill of the fuselage seeping through my coat like a cold, final goodbye. I pulled out my phone. It was still vibrating in my palm, a frantic, staccato pulse of notifications from a past I was leaving behind. I navigated to the cellular settings. There it was, personal Boston. 10 years of my life distilled into a single digital line. I scrolled to the bottom and tapped the text that glowed a violent red, delete eSIM. A prompt appeared, cold and cautionary. This action cannot be undone. You will lose connection to this network permanently. That was exactly the point. I hit confirm. I watched the signal bars in the corner blink once and die, replaced by the hollow finality of no service. In a fraction of a second, the invisible tether binding me to that house in Boston, to the scent of carnations on the dining table and the weight of debts I never signed for, was severed. The device was a blank slate now, ready for a new QR code, a new horizon, and a life in California where I was finally the one in control. The plane shot up through the cloud layer, and Boston disappeared. I had expected, I thought, to cry. I had spent 28 years assuming that whenever the moment came, if it ever came, there would be some grand interior weather to mark it. A sob, a shudder, a reckoning. Instead, I watched the wing dip into a clean white nothing and felt, under my ribs, a small private opening, the way a window unsticks after a long winter. The flight attendant came by. I asked for a glass of water. I drank it slowly and looked out at the top of the sky, and I understood, in a way I had never been allowed to understand inside my mother's dining room, that I was the only person I had ever needed permission from. California was a different element. The apartment I had rented sight unseen turned out to be a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a stucco building with a lemon tree in the courtyard. The light came in from 2 directions. In the mornings it was pale and clean. By 4 in the afternoon it turned the walls the color of unsalted butter. I bought a mattress, a lamp, a second-hand desk. I cooked for myself. I walked to work past the eucalyptus trees and learned the names of the streets the way a child learned them, 1 corner at a time. I kept my phone number new. My family did not have it. My firm knew not to give it to anyone who called asking. A few months in, a message came through on an old social app I had almost forgotten I still used. It was Selena. She wrote a long paragraph. She was sorry. She had pieced it together slowly, through her mother, through Mrs. Rivera, through the slow collapse of a story that had once been told at tea. Troy had sold the BMW. Frederick was at the local public high school, which he would survive, the way most children survived the ambitions their parents could not afford. My mother had stopped coming to the Ivy and Iron Society after the fall meeting. She had missed the winter luncheon too. By spring, she had quietly let her membership lapse because there was nowhere in that sunroom she could sit without someone knowing. Selena said she hoped I was well. She said she thought about me. I read it twice. I did not type a reply. I sent her a single smiley face, the small yellow kind, and closed the app. I looked at myself sometimes in the glass of the lab door before I badged in my mother's eyes. Still, unfortunately, in my own face, and I did not flinch anymore. The features were hers. The life was not. I was the girl who paid her own way through college. I was the woman who walked out of a dining room and onto a plane. I was, by then, something quieter, a person who got to decide. The California light came through the UV-tinted high windows in long, clean bars across the floor, carefully avoiding the darkened corners where the sensitive assays incubated. I thought I'd won. I'd put 3,000 miles between myself and Mrs. Robinson's dining table, but I realized that geography is a useless science when pitted against a haunting. Then, the heavy lab door wheezed open, and Dr. Sterling stepped in. She had clearly just come from the quarterly funding committee meeting upstairs. She was still wearing her sharp, charcoal gray blazer and a silk scarf that felt a few degrees too formal for a Tuesday morning. As she approached my workstation, a molecular ghost trailed behind her. It was Joe Malone French Lime Blossom. The scent was incredibly faint, a mere lingering trace that should have been scrubbed away by the high-efficiency ventilation system. In a high-stakes lab, any fragrance was a technical transgression, but on Sterling, it felt like a badge of the world. She had just vacated the world of boards, budgets, and power. But for me, that faint trace was a scream. My heart constricted, a conditioned reflex programmed over 28 years. It was the scent Mrs. Robinson wore on the days she was preparing to make a move. Sterling rested her hand on the back of my own. Her palm was slightly cool, and the strike of her heels against the floor echoed a rhythm I'd heard in my worst nightmares. "Teagan," she said, her voice honey-warm, the exact frequency of a trap. "I'd like to discuss your future. We want you to be an integral part of our long-term plans here." This was it, I thought. The cage had caught up. I looked into her eyes, bracing myself for the calculation, the exploitation, the betrayal. I was already arming my refusals, already mentally packing my bags for the next flight, the next city, the next escape. But Sterling didn't continue. She simply tilted her head, observing the tremor in my hands. The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating stillness before a storm. It was the silence of professional observation. "Teagan, are you all right?" she asked. This time, her voice wasn't Mrs. Robinson's honey trap. It was steady, professional, and carried a note of genuine concern. She withdrew her hand, granting me the one thing my mother never had: space. "I'm sorry if I caught you off guard. What I mean is, the firm wants to fully fund your independent research. The intellectual property will remain yours, but we want to sign you to a long-term contract to ensure a competitor doesn't poach you." She smiled, a smile devoid of a predator's triumph. "We value you, Teagan, not as a tool, but as a lead architect. If you need time to review the legalities with your own counsel, please, take it." I stood there, paralyzed. The scent of French lime blossom was still there, but it was just a fragrance. The ring on her hand was just a piece of jewelry. In Sterling's vocabulary, words like family and commitment didn't mean endless sacrifice. They meant a sustainable partnership. I looked at my reflection in the lab's glass partition. My mother's eyes, Mrs. Robinson's eyes, stared back at me, but for the first time, I saw them for what they were, just pigments and cells. They possessed no power to dictate my reality. The cage I felt, the iron bars, the scent, the suffocation, it was all the scar tissue of a wound that hadn't yet closed. Mrs. Robinson wasn't here. She was in Boston, sitting beside a bowl of wilted white carnations, bitter over debts no one was coming to pay. Sterling took a step back, handing me the folder with absolute respect. "Get some rest, Teagan. California has plenty of sun. Don't spend all of it in the lab." She walked away, her heels clicking a steady beat. This time, I didn't count the rhythm. I wasn't running anymore. I was standing still. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the sunlight here could actually be warm if I stopped looking at it as an illusion. Freedom isn't finding a place where the ghosts don't exist. It's standing in front of the ghost and knowing it can't touch you anymore.